Welcome to Smiling Through the Tears. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. We will be talking about different forms of grief tonight. I'm sure every single listener has at some point in their life dealt with grief in some form. Oftentimes people associate grief with death, which is certainly a type of grief. However, there are many different variations of grief, and tonight we're going to discuss all the different types. Grief is something that we hear often, but what actually is grief? It's a natural response to losing something you value. But there are many circumstances of loss beyond the death of a loved one. I think oftentimes when we think of grief, we think of death, and that is one, but there's many other types of ways that we grieve. When something is important to you, be it a person, place, pet, or object, its disappearance from your life can provoke a sense of loss. This void left behind is associated with feelings of grief, a mourning for what used to be. Grief is an individual process, and while various staged models of grief exist to help us understand the concept clearly, there is no wrong way to process a loss of any kind. And I know that some people do judge people on how they do process losses. For example, when my close friend lost her mother, one of my other friends asked me why, like 2 years later, she was still grieving. And she's like, I find it odd that she's still grieving that loss. And I reminded her that everybody does grieve differently. And just because one person grieves one way doesn't make it right or wrong, because we all process and we all grieve in different ways.
I also think real quick that when you have something come up, or a song or something that you remember playing or doing something with a certain somebody that's not in your life anymore, that could bring back memories that can bring, I don't know if you'd call it grief or sadness, because they're not there to enjoy that with you anymore or whatnot. So would that be a form of grief, or is that just...
I think so, absolutely. Okay. I'm going to give a little list here of the different types of grief, and I guarantee everybody listening can associate with one or more of these different types of grief. And the one that we're most familiar with is death. We've all experienced the death of a loved one, maybe even a pet, somebody close to us. Relationship breakups, any other form of loss that comes as a shock, a divorce, a financial loss, physical loss, illness, injury, health changes, moving. I can tell you that I had a little bit of a grieving process. I just moved back to the home that I raised my kids in recently. This month, I went back to that home, and I cannot begin to tell you the memories that started flooding my mind, and I wasn't expecting all the emotional baggage that I would take back to that home when I went and moved back in. But that was the house that my kids grew up in, and remembering the memories, we had the best times there. We used to have kids in our house all the time, and our summers were the best. We would have fires every night and basketball games and football games, and we just had a lot of fun. And just remembering all those things, wishing that I could have hit the rewind button and that I would have cherished and treasured those moments with more intention. I don't think we live with intention a lot of times. We live in the hustle bustle of life, like we're waiting for the next stage and the next thing. And a lot of times in doing that, we miss what's standing right in front of us, and we miss those precious moments that we're never going to get back, and we don't realize they're precious, unfortunately, until they've passed. And I think a lot of us do that, and it's unfortunately, I would like to tell every parent of a young child, live in the moment. Enjoy every stage of your child's life, because I can tell you from experience that it goes by way too fast. And even though now I'm enjoying the new season of my life with grandchildren, 5 grandsons, which I absolutely adore each and every one of them. They're all very unique and special in their own way, and they have the best little personalities. And you think when your kids grow up and they have kids, of course you know that you're going to love those babies, but you don't realize the intensity of that love that you have for them. There's nothing in the world greater than being a grandparent, and any grandparents out there will be a witness to that. And so even though I do enjoy that, I can't tell you how oftentimes my mind goes back to memories, especially now being in the home that I have raised my kids in, how it just like makes you feel sad about that time being gone and knowing that you're never going to have it back. But I'm working through that, and I'll get through it, and thinking of the new memories that we're going to make in the home with the grandkids. So moving can definitely bring grief, loss of dreams, retirement, home loss, job loss, or a job change. So we're going to go through all the different types of grief. Those are things that we grieve, and these are the different types of grief. And the first one we're going to go over is abrupt grief, also known as traumatic grief. It can happen anywhere at any time. And I can tell you what came to mind for me when I was going over grief, was praying about it, and I felt like this was something that a lot of people deal with and that it would be really great to talk about. And so there was an abrupt grief moment in my life 24 years ago, Monday. I ended up getting pregnant with my third child, which I was unexpected and I wasn't thrilled about. I was actually very disappointed to be pregnant. I didn't want another child. We just built a house with the exact amount of bedrooms, and the last thing I wanted really was to have another baby. But then once I went to the doctors and I heard the heartbeat, I was like really loving the idea, and I thought, oh, it's going to be okay. It'll all work out. And then I went back about 5.5 months along for a checkup, and the doctor acted very strange, and I asked him if something was wrong, and he said that he was having a hard time getting the heartbeat. And so as I was sitting there, he did another internal sonogram and informed me that the baby had passed. And so I don't know if a lot of you know this, but when you're over 5 months pregnant and you have a baby die inside of you, then you have to go through labor. You have to have a funeral. You go through a lot of things. And so I had to have a funeral. I had to go through labor, and it was a very traumatic experience. So that is a form of traumatic grief. And that's the one that came to my mind when I was going over these notes. And the anniversary of her death was actually Sunday. April's been a rough month. It was the anniversary of my grandma's death, the anniversary of my baby. Her name was Faith Hope. I named her Faith Hope because I believe and have faith that there was a reason that happened, and I have hope that I will absolutely for sure see her in heaven again someday. So it's okay to step away from whatever you're doing and allow yourself to experience those sudden emotions and time to process the information, because sometimes when something like that hits you, it's not an easy process. I mean, there were times when it's not easy to process that. There was times I would be sitting at home eating dinner. In the middle of dinner, I would just start sobbing and crying because it would just hit me out of nowhere that, I had this loss. The next one is prolonged grief. Prolonged grief is any grief that stays with you long term. And it can interfere with your daily life, and it can significantly impair important areas of your functioning in your life. I have a best friend, and she wanted to have like 4 babies, and she ended up having no babies. And she grieves that pretty much on a daily basis. And so any of you out there that wanted to be a mama and never got that opportunity, I know that pain because I have so much empathy, and I see the tears that she cries on a daily basis because of that loss. And so I'm so sorry for that. And that is probably one of the worst ways to have to grieve, is having the inability to have a baby when it was your long life desire and dream. And so that's something that is considered prolonged grief, and it just breaks my heart to think of anybody that has also gone through that like my friend has. It can actually turn into complicated grief, and it can last for a very long time, months, years, and it can cause depression, anxiety, and even cause you to not enjoy doing the things that you once enjoyed doing in your life. The next one is absent grief. The absence of feeling grief when you experience devastating loss is a form of grief. Absent grief can occur when you're not able to grieve because you are numbed by shock, denial, or disassociation. So when I think of the absent grief, I think of when my grandma passed away 3 years ago in April. It was devastating to me. It was unexpected. She ended up getting sick, went into the hospital, died probably a week later. And it was a very difficult thing to process because my grandma was my person. She was my counselor. She was my source of reason. When I was going a little crazy with my thoughts, she would bring me back to reality. She was always kept it real with me. and told me the truth of what she felt, and just a very special person in my life. And it's been a very difficult time still not having her in my life to be able to call and go over different problems I'm having in my life to get some grandma counseling. So that would be something that would remind me of an absent grief. The next one is delayed grief. Delayed grief may appear as absent grief at first, but rather than remaining unexpressed, this is a form of grief that can slowly emerge as a weight of a loss that finally becomes reality. And when I try to think of what kind of delayed grief have I ever experienced, one thing that kind of came to my mind was my dad passed away 21 years ago, and he and I did not have the best relationship. He lived in a different state. I didn't see him often. And so when he passed away, it was like I didn't feel an overwhelming amount of grief because I didn't see him often. We didn't have a close relationship. So I actually got judged by my family for not crying and being devastated at the funeral. I was sad. I felt terrible that he had passed, but it wasn't like a huge loss because I didn't really have a relationship with him. But then as time went on and I started thinking about, the things that I could have done to maybe on my end improve that relationship, I did start grieving that relationship and that loss. And it was definitely a delayed grief. Once I was able to realize, the things that I missed out on by not having my dad present in my life, then I did absolutely deal with delayed grief in that area of my life. And so anybody that has an absent parent that maybe you didn't have a lot of time with throughout your childhood or even your adult life, I think that when they pass, it's a hard thing because you grieve in two ways. You grieve their death, and then you grieve in the fact that you never had a relationship with them, and that relationship that was lost, and that there's no way to ever have that relationship because they're no longer here.
What age were you when your dad passed, Christina?
I was 28, I believe. Then there's disenfranchised grief, and that's experiencing loss that is stigmatized or disregarded by society. And a lot of those types of grief that people the culture and society does not recognize your loss as being valid. What that would include is suicide, substance misuse, STDs, things of that nature. Couldn't really think of anything. I don't really know of anybody that, personally that went through any of those things to make that where I could think of anything that I've dealt with in that area. And then the next one would be collective grief. Sometimes loss can affect a nation, a people, a culture, an entire world. The community level form of grief is known as collective grief. It is an experience common after tragedies like war, mass shootings, hate crimes, and violations of human rights. What comes to mind to me, and I'm sure a lot of you probably think of the same thing, is 9/11. That is absolutely something that was a collective grief. The entire country mourned and turned to God. Churches were filled during that time. I find it sad, though, that it takes tragedy like that in order to fill the churches up in America, because our churches are suffering right now. There's churches that are closing because people just are not interested in church anymore. And I think that's very sad. It takes tragedies like that in order for people to want to turn to God.
I think that right now, our nation, a lot of us probably are going through some grief thinking about the way our country was set up to exist with liberty to be available and for people to honor the Constitution, and that's kind of out the door now, and we see a lot of things that are corrupt going on, and I think that brings grief to people. Think of how things used to be versus the way they are now.
Absolutely. I find myself oftentimes feeling sad regarding the current conditions of our country, for sure, and the decline of morals. Everything that seems totally flipped. Good is bad, bad is good, wrong is right, and right is seen as wrong. And it's a very sad state that our country is in right now. And the only thing that's going to change it is God. The next thing is secondary loss grief. And that is the death of a loved one, but sometimes the experience of a result of a loss from something, like if you have a divorce and you lose family and friends through that, that would be like a secondary loss of grief. And then the next form of grief, anticipatory grief. When you know the inevitable outcome is lost, you may start to feel grief because you actually lose what's important to you. This type of grief is known as anticipatory grief, and it can occur during situations with long-term illnesses. For example, maybe cancer, relationships where divorce was looming for years, or other ones where you can see the outcome before it happens. So now that we know all the different types of grief, I guess the next question would be, well, how in the world do you ever get over the grief? And sometimes, unfortunately, I feel like people live their whole life and they deal with maybe the same grief or different forms of grief. And there's all different types of ways. There's counseling, journaling. The best and the most effective would be seeking God to help you through that time. And all the things that I've grieved and different things that I've gone through, I have gone to counseling before, and it maybe helped a little, and I've journaled. But the thing that helped me the most was when I actually turned and sought God for answers, for healing, for the mending of my broken heart at different times. And so,
what ways did you seek God, Christina?
Prayer. A lot of times when I'm going through certain seasons of life and I'm dealing with, for example, when I was going through that unforgiveness where I was really struggling to forgive, I would find every pastor that I liked and watch sermons on forgiveness and get positive information into my mind to help me to be able to do those things.
What are some of the pastors that you listen to?
Right now, my favorite is Priscilla Shire. She is amazing, and I just admire her so much. She is just a woman of God, and she's not afraid to speak the facts and the truth. And I like Charles Stanley. I know he passed away, but I still can listen to him and just get so much good information into my brain. I'm trying to think. Tony Edwards, her dad, is really great too.
I remember one you told me about. I think his name was Brandon Lee.
Yes, my son, Brandon Lee. Yes, he's excellent. If you ever get a chance to listen to him. No, my son is an assistant pastor, and he does an amazing job. I absolutely get a lot of good information from him. And sometimes, even when he's not preaching, he'll be like, Mom, you need to do this or that, or did you think of this? So there's been often times in my life that he's brought things to my attention that maybe I haven't done or could have done or should be doing. But I was just going to give you some scriptures that prove what I'm telling you, and not just because I said that God can do it, but because the Bible literally says it. Matthew 5:4 says, Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. It doesn't say they may be or possibly, they shall be. So when you're mourning and grieving, you reach out and you call on God, and he is going to comfort you. Revelation 21:4, he will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and death shall be no more. Neither shall there be mourning, nor crying, nor pain, for the former things have passed away. He's wiped the tears from my eyes, not physically, but when I prayed and I've had heartbreak in my life, he comforted me, and literally, eventually the tears dried up, and he helped me get through those difficult times. Psalm 147:3, he heals the brokenhearted and binds up their wounds. 1 Peter 5:7, casting all your anxieties on him because he cares for you. And this is one of my favorites, Psalm 34:18, because I've used it so many times in my life. The Lord is near to the brokenhearted, and he saves the crushed in spirit. Another one is John 16:22. So with you now is your time of grief, but I will see you again, and you will rejoice, and no one will take away your joy. So if you are in the midst of grieving, or if your heart is breaking for whatever reason, hopefully those scriptures can bring some comfort to you, and maybe you can just go and recite them. Sometimes I think it's even helpful to write scriptures down and post them on mirrors and post them around your house. And so then when you're having discouraging days and you see those scriptures, they can encourage you and maybe fill your heart with some peace and some joy. But life is unfortunately ever changing. And if you're like me, I struggle with change. But sadly, it's a part of life. But with God, we are more than conquerors, and we can overcome any and every obstacle that the devil puts in our way. And just real quick, I just wasn't planning on saying this, but I'm going to. I've been really struggling. Satan has been on my back for about a month now, and he has just really tried to bombard my mind with negativity and self-doubt and just a lot of just negative stuff. And he thinks that he's going to win this battle, but he's wrong, because he doesn't realize that I have a Savior that is going to help me to overcome all these things. And this is a time that we go through different times in life. And this is a time where, I've had a lot of changes take place. Like I said, I just moved. I've been working like 12-hour shifts. Just a lot of times, a lot of things going on in my life. And I just heard a pastor say that the devil does not attack you when you're well rested. He attacks you when you're weary and tired. And I have been very weary and tired, and lots been going on in my life. And the devil has taken advantage of that. And he thinks that he is going to be victorious in defeating me, but he will never defeat me, because I will continue fighting this fight, and I will come out victorious every single time, not because of who I am, because I'm nothing without Jesus Christ, but because of him. I'm righteous, and I can do all things through him who gives me strength. And so I know that this is just a season in my life, and we all go through seasons, and this season seems it will never end, but I know that light is at the end of the tunnel, and good things are in store for me, because I am a child of God, and I have my hope and my faith in him. And anytime you put your faith and hope in him, you can be nothing but victorious, because he's a God of victors, and he will make me victorious in all ways. And I'm just so thankful that he doesn't give up on us like others do. He is always faithful, and his grace and his mercies are new every day. And that is, like, we don't realize what a blessing that is, that his grace and his mercies are new every single day. And his unconditional love is never failing. Like, he loves us unconditionally. And I'm so, like, I literally thank him for those things on a daily basis, because I think a lot of times we take that stuff for granted. But it's so important, because we live in a very harsh world right now, and a very evil world where attacks are constant. I mean, there's a constant attack on us Christians daily, and the devil just doesn't want to give us a minute's rest. And you always know, though, when you are doing something that is worthy, that the devil's not going to stop. He does not want you doing good. He does not want you touching people's lives. He does not want you helping others. And so if you could just pray for me, I'd appreciate it. I think we all could use prayer. We could all use kindness, which brings me to my next quick story, and then I'm going to close. Yes?
Real quick, before you get into that last part, just want to bring a couple things to make people aware of. One is, I was listening to Dr. A. Shaw recently. He's wrote like 7 books, and he was talking about the importance of prayer, just like you're bringing up right now. And I'm one that prays often, but usually I'm thanking and I'm asking for stuff when I pray. And one of the things that this gentleman had brought to my attention that I think can help everybody, if you're anything like me, is take time to listen. Because usually we have a lot that we can say to God, but do we take the time to stay in prayer and just listen for his voice and his direction and his guidance? And I think that that's something I was missing. And I'm thankful to Dr. A. Shaw, which, by the way, he will be at a meeting here locally in Columbiana coming up in next month, where others can sit in on his message. But that's something I think everybody, if you haven't been, can help you. Also, when I think of what you're talking about and how you deal with things that come at you, and this world can chew you up and spit you out, I think that on purpose, you have to plan time into your schedule to pray. You have to plan time to put good information into your brain from what God teaches us. And that will really help you when you're dealing with things. And one of the things I always think about is if I go back and I think about when my kids were younger, or just different things that might make you sad, I always go back to, wait a minute, you got to get back on track, right? And you got to keep going forward, because what would God expect from you? What would that person maybe that you lost or isn't around anymore expect of you? To wallow and feel bad, or to go make a difference and help others? And I think that's one of the things that can really help people. And I think God in multiple areas of the Bible teaches us that when you focus on others besides self, it really is a way to nurture your own soul and help you feel a lot more better mentally. So those are some things I thought might help.
Yes, I agree. And that's funny, because Priscilla Shire, I was just listening to her over the weekend, and she was talking about the importance of listening. Like, take time out to express to God praise and express to God, your desires, but then take that time to just listen, because a lot of times we can't hear God's voice because we are not quiet enough to listen. And I think it's so important. And Charles Stanley once said that, as far as you talking about taking the time out to go pray, it's how important it is to have a special place, a prayer closet, and not literally a closet, but a place that's yours and God's, where when you go there, you and God are doing business. It's you and God time, and it's time that you seek God. And that's what I've been really struggling with lately is I pray every day. I talk to God all the time. I drive down the road. I'm always talking to God, telling God things, and sometimes I tell him too much, and I need to listen and see what he wants to tell me. The amazing thing about God is he is such a good Father, and he loves us regardless of whether we're praying, whether we're listening. But we need to try to include all these things into our daily lives. And he expects us to also be kind to others and show others grace. How about if we gave others the same grace that he extended to us? Can you imagine what a much better world this would be if all of us were just showed a little more grace and a little more kindness to others? And so I was at Giant Eagle today, and I was really irritated. I was in line and I was checking out. The lady that was checking me out was not very kind, and she was not friendly at all, which is fine. I don't care. However, there was an older man behind me, and I guess he wasn't putting his items on the belt, and he was a little confused. And as I was paying, I kept hearing her say, "Put it on the belt, put it on the belt." And I was thinking she was talking to me, but I was ignoring her because I knew I already put everything on the belt and I was paying, and I was like, whatever. But then I looked up, and there was this little old man, and she was like, "Put it on the belt." And he's like, oh, okay. And he was very nervous, and he put the stuff on the belt, and she looked at me, and she used the Lord's name in vain. And I was very upset because anybody that knows me well knows that I love the elderly, and I will advocate for them every single day and every time. And so I looked up at her, and I told her that was rude. Like, do you know that everybody's going through things, and how about if you practice kindness? Like, why are you talking to him like that? He does not deserve to be talked to like that. She was not very happy with me and wouldn't even make eye contact with me as I was kind of telling her that she needed to be kind. And I know we're all dealing with things. We all have stuff in our lives, grief, hurt, sadness, pain. But if we could just all be kind to each other, that would be great. Like, somehow along the line, our culture and our society has forgot how to be kind to one another. You go to stores and people are not kind. You're driving around, people are honking at each other, flipping each other off. People are they're angry. And a lot of times it's just a matter of they're hurting. And imagine how maybe just saying a kind thing to somebody could totally change their whole trajectory of their day. Or maybe if they're hanging on by a thread, your kindness could be just what they needed to give them the strength to get through another day. We don't know what somebody standing next to us is going through. We have no idea what the hurt might be that they've experienced. Maybe they lost a child, or maybe they lost their job. Like, we don't know what somebody's going through. So I just want to encourage everybody, please just be kind to each other. It's simple. Like, let's make that popular again. Just kindness. And as far as the grief goes, I just wanted to put a plug in for my church. Grace Fellowship Church in Niles, Ohio is going to be having a grief seminar. And I went to one a couple years ago, and it was phenomenal. And I would encourage you, if you or anybody you know is experiencing grief or having some form of grief in your life at this time, that it would be a really great thing to go to. And then after the grief ceremony, they will also put you in an 8-week program to help you if you need further counseling through that. So I just want to encourage everybody to be kind, and life is tough, and we all have a lot of struggles, and we all have hurts and pains, but just keep smiling through the tears, and remember, God's always got your back. Enjoy your evening. Thank you so much for your support, and thank you for joining the podcast, and I hope you have a great night.